Hello. Tamai Waka. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It's great to see folks. I see some folks popping online as attendees. I'm very grateful to have Norbert Hill and Kathleen Ratteree join us it's afternoon here in Alaska and also afternoon where I think Norbert and Kathleen are, right? Yes.
Right.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I'm going to do a little introduction and then we'll move into conversation with our guests. So Tamai Koyana for coming to our most recent installment of our occasional series called Sarrsa Time or Tea Time in Yupik. I'm Alicia Towns-Spain. I'm Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Foundation, formerly the BB&C Education Foundation until earlier this month. Before getting started with our session, we always like to begin these sessions with a land acknowledgement by thanking our Alutiiq Sugpiaq, Danaina Tanaina, Yupik people of Bristol Bay. We also would like to recognize the Danaina of the Eklutna and Kanik tribes, whose lands the foundation reside on now in what we call Anchorage. We recognize the thousands of years of stewardship and acknowledge the people of our own home region and the people here of Anchorage as they continue to be the wonderful caretakers of this land and allow us to be here. We also want to recognize and let folks know, of course, that this series of conversations has been funded. Sarrsa Time has been made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Sustaining Humanities through the American Rescue Plan, in partnership with the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. We are very, very grateful for this support. However, they do like us to let you know that any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this talk does not necessarily represent the views of ATLM or the National Endowment. So good to know. Our topic today is again around blood quantum and Native identity. It's actually the fourth conversation in a series. And the first was with Lagane Medicine Crow a couple months ago, or a few months ago now. I think probably more than 6 months ago now. And then these recent conversations we had with Dr. Rosita Worrell, and then last week with a group of our BB&C shareholder descendants. And I think each conversation has brought richness, nuance to this topic of blood quantum, of who we are as Native people. We know that this is a critical issue for our community right now, particularly as our regional corporation, as the Village Corps, begin to consider enrollment of Alaska Native descendants. I myself am a descendant who was gifted shares by my mom. So it's critical that all of us consider these issues as we move forward. So now a little bit about our guests on the call today, Norbert Hill and Kathleen Ratteree. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves in whatever way you want to say fit, but maybe before I do that, I'll just say how we found each other in this great world of the internet. A friend had suggested that after learning that I was interested in this topic, had suggested that I read this really powerful book, which was The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations. It's available on Amazon, that's where I got it. And after reading the chapters in this book and just learning some of the incredible history, we tracked down Norbert and Kathleen and did even a cold call to say, would you be willing to come and talk to us about this book and these conversations? And I feel so grateful that you picked up your phones and answered random emails from Alaska to have a conversation about this with all of us. So Koyana, for being here, we really appreciate it. So our plan for the next hour or so is just to talk, the three of us. Our Sarrsa times really are intended to with a good cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and just sharing with each other about our experiences and what we care about. And then at the last half an hour, for those who are joining us online, if you would like to participate through the chat, please do. If you have questions that you want to ask our guests, you could put them in the chat. And Oli Ambrosia is online, and she will make sure that your question is surfaced for the group. And we're really grateful that you tuned in. So I think that's all my preambles. I know it gets long, but thank you very much again for being here. And maybe Norbert, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself first.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today. During the pandemic, I got tired of Zoom, but I'm glad I didn't have to fly to the North Pole to be with you today. So I'm hoping this will suffice. I'm a citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, but I'm also Mohawk and Cree. And so there's two other tribes that are there, but I'm officially enrolled in the Oneida Nation. I was born in the city. I was born in Detroit. And when I was in high school, we moved to the reservation. I would say that I went to the same high school as Eminem. He followed me there. And but I used to deliver papers in the 50s to the house that he eventually was to live in. I live on the Oneida Reservation. I have to say, it's maybe more apropos to the book, when I got to college, I couldn't read, write, or talk, so I married an English teacher, and that's a true story. And I can say more about that in the book. I found Kathleen, who was an English major. But most of my career has been in higher education. For 15 years, I directed the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and ACES just hosted a nationwide conference in Canada, and we have a number of ACES students in Alaska. And I remember one year coming back from a conference that the students from Alaska were so far away, we could never win chapter of the year. They were just kind of whining and whatever. And I said, here, these are the directions. This is what exactly you have to do to win the chapter of the award. And they did everything I told them, and they won the chapter of the year. They were just so excited about that. That made it feel included, that the time and distance didn't make a difference, that they felt they were part of the group. And then after I left ACES, I managed the American Indian Graduate Center, providing scholarships to students in law school, medical school, graduate school, and also managed the Bill Gates Millennium Scholarship for Indians. But throughout the years, I always told students, when you graduate from college, go home and fix something, fix anything. And the advice that elders gave us a while back was, it's not what your head knows when you graduate from college, what does your heart know? And that kind of quote stuck with me. I finally took my own advice. I moved back to my home reservation. I was vice president for a tribal college for about 5 years. Then I directed the education programs for the Oneida tribe. And so that's a long story, but anyway, I'm going to stick to it, and that's what I've done.
Thanks for being here. Kathleen, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathleen Ratteree, and I live in what is now called Denmark, Wisconsin. My family and I have a 40-acre farm here, and we are on the original homelands of the Ho-Chunk and the Menominee and Anishinaabe peoples. So we have lived here. I have two kids, Daniel and Eliza, who are 11 and 8. And my husband, Paul, and we've been living here in this beautiful place for about 12 years now. And I originally grew up in the Chicago area with a backyard that was like this big. And I just finished up my dissertation, my doctoral degree in First Nations education at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. So I am reemerging as fully human again, but it is a fantastic program. Our cohort of 12 of us started in the program, which is the first doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, which is very exciting. So our cohort started in 2018. We're the very first one. So we got to be the guinea pigs. And it was at times challenging, but also exciting to learn alongside and with the faculty. And I am non-native, and my work has been, and my dissertation project has been centered around what it looks like to be an ally, and the nonstop learning and self-reflection that goes along with that work, the challenges and the joys that it brings. So my dissertation project was on indigenous agriculture and medicinal plants. And I created a teaching garden at an environmental center not too far from the Oneida Reservation. And just finding ways to help students that come out there to learn more about the 12 Native nations in Wisconsin, and to learn more about their place in the world, the natural world, the plants in it in particular, and to help give them some experiences that will connect them with the natural world and help them make good ethical choices as they grow up, to take care and be good stewards of the land. So that project just wrapped up this spring, but I'm continuing my work with the Fallen Timbers Environmental Education Center, and I'll be teaching out there actually the rest of this week. I've met Norbert. I think my son Daniel was pretty brand new. He's now 11. So my gosh, Norbert. So about 10 years ago, I was on the Wisconsin Historical Society Foundation board and met a mutual friend of Norbert's and talked about the work that I had done with that I was currently doing with Menominee at their wellness center on the Menominee Reservation. And they introduced me to Norbert, who very quickly got me up to speed on what the Oneida Nation was doing around the blood quantum conversations and getting community education, a push to get Oneida citizens aware and engaged in like how blood quantum came to be. Where did it come from? What is the purpose of it, and how to think outside that blood quantum box? So I began working with, in 2013, I began working with Sustain Oneida. And this is a group that continues to facilitate community conversations like this one. I mean, that kitchen table model is also at the heart of what Sustain Oneida does. And to get constructive dialogue on tribal enrollment criteria and belonging and identity and all these really emotionally laden topics. So creating spaces for people to come together in a safe place to talk about these issues. And I, in collaboration with Sustain Oneida, I co-wrote a series of articles for the Gully Weesox, which is the Oneida tribal newspaper, just to get more information into the community and to get people talking about these issues, because like many tribes around the US and Canada, who are all dealing with blood quantum in different ways, there needs to be an engaged and informed community to make decisions for future generations. So that's what that work is all about. And so, yeah, Norbert and I co-edited this anthology, the book that Alicia just showed you, The Great Vanishing Act, which is has Native authors from around the country, and there's also a couple Maori authors in New Zealand. There's an Ainu author from Japan, and this is a global conversation, but it's really focused particularly on the US and Canada, and many different perspectives on how different tribes are approaching blood quantum. So that's it about me. I'll just leave it there for now and just say that I'm very honored and excited to be here and to hear from the people here, your thoughts, and looking forward to a good conversation. So
I would be remiss. I didn't say that I had children. And I have a daughter who works at Harvard at the John Kennedy School of Government, and she runs a program called Honoring Nations, which is designed to strengthen tribal governments. And I have a son who is a postdoc at Berkeley in microbiology. And I have another daughter who is a nurse in Boulder. So I got Boulder, Boston, and Berkeley. So it's coast to coast and one in the middle. And I'm really proud of them. But, you know, Kathleen mentioned the kitchen table. If we all remember, our first classroom in the world is the kitchen table. That's where we learn stories about our family. We learn table manners, some of us anyway. We learn about who our relatives are and how we belong, how we fit in this family. So our first classroom really is the kitchen table. And so I think those are important discussions that around blood quantum we have around families and the kitchen table. Then the table gets bigger and bigger to form a community.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, thanks for introducing yourselves a little bit. Maybe I'll just say, you know, in addition to my role, which I did at the top, I too am a mom of two boys that are grade school age 12 and 8 years old. And yeah, I see my mom as one of the attendees. Ingrid Hansen is on today as part of the Zoom. So hi, Mom. You know, it definitely is you know, a family affair. And then, you know, tribally, we are Alutiiq people, and my family is from Pilot Point, Alaska, which, you know, is in the great, here's our great map of Alaska. And I see a lot of our other community members on the call today too. So thank you for joining us. You know, you started to talk a little bit, Kathleen, about, well, first of all, congratulations. And I think I may refer to you as Dr. Ratteree, because you really earned that from congratulations on your degree. That's wonderful news.
Thank you.
Yes. You know, I was curious, you know, especially for you, Norbert, you've done a lot of things. You had a long career. Like, what moved you to take on this particular project and this topic about blood quantum? Like, why did you decide to do that?
Kathleen started to talk about is that we Well, I'm elected, one of the elected leaders for our trust and enrollment committee. And we certify new enrollees that are eligible for Oneida citizenship. But what we noticed is that a great deal of our new people being enrolled are quarter bloods. And that amounts to almost 45% of our tribe. And another 25% are half or less. Indians marry out more than any other ethnic group. And so you don't have to be a genius to figure out what happens, because we used to have families of 10 and 12. Now we have families of 1 and 2. And so the baby boomer generation is starting to die out. So our mortality rate is higher than our birth rate. And so I saw the political cartoon by Marty Tubles, which is in the back of the book, which you may want to share with your group at some other time. But you don't have to be a genius to figure out that we're disappearing. And then we looked around to find out what resources there were in terms of blood quantum that, that we could learn more about it. And we found that there's very little out there. And so Kathleen put together a number of articles and for our newspaper, just try to educate our community. And, I contributed some to that. And soon we had enough articles to put a book together. And the book is not intended to be an academic book. The book is, we tried to gear things down to about the 5th grade level. So grassroots people in the community could understand what this was about. And that's the audience that we're going to. So I also want to say up front, the partnership between Kathleen and I, there's no book without Kathleen. As I said, I married an English teacher, but I found another English teacher. So in a sense that Kathleen's my book wife, but she provided a perspective. She provided a perspective that from the native and non-native worlds, that in terms of understanding. Our book is really, it's about community education. How long does it take to educate a community? We didn't know that. And we were just searching for people who would write something and give voice to what we're doing. So, we struggled through. What we did this backwards. We found a publisher and a cover, which I alluded to, but we found a publisher before we even submitted one word. Usually people write the book, then they look for a publisher, but we did it the other way around. And to date, we sold over 3,000 books. There were over 450 tribes that are dealing with the IRA constitutions. And so we're not the only ones in this predicament. So we've been giving talks, Kathleen and I, to a variety of groups, students and communities and wherever, just to get the dialogue going. So at the end of the day, that we're informed, so we can make informed decisions about how we move forward. We don't have an answer for you. We just know that we have to make an informed decision about our own people, and every tribe has the ability to define their own citizenship. So, we can't tell you what you should be doing, but you need to get enough information so you can make the right decisions as you move forward. And I tell young people, I'm not going to be here in 50 years, but you will be. And I'm sorry that we're going to leave you a little bit of a mess here, but you need to figure out how your children and grandchildren are going to be enrolled or be part of the community. It's not about the next 20 years, it's about the next 200 years. So we got to take the longer view in terms of how that plays out.
Yep.
That's really helpful. Thanks. I was curious because there's some really important history, I think, that is covered in this book. And Kathleen, I know you were the author of some of those original articles. What are, if you could distill down a 500-page book or 400 into some key takeaways, that have helped maybe guide your work with Oneida or with other communities? What are some of the key things that you think people should know?
I think if one of the main takeaways in the book is that blood quantum is not a native construct. Blood quantum is I mean, like bloodlines of thoroughbred horses or feudal bloodlines in England. It's a European concept that was overlaid onto native communities at the turn of the century. And native communities have struggled with what to do with that ever since. So it's a really problematic construct because it's a mechanical kind of or biological marker for belonging. And Indigenous communities have historically always been very fluid, where there was migrations and warfare and raids and adoptions, and there's always been a flow of people through these communities that were adopted in, or there were protocols for deciding who was part of the group. And so this blood quantum concept is kind of threw a monkey wrench into the works. And at the heart of it, it really is a colonial construct that is designed to get rid of the Indian problem. Because if you turn belonging into mathematical fractions, eventually those fractions will run out. And it's been around since the Indian Reorganization Act, where it was formally put into these tribal constitutions and declared that Indians were people of 1/2 or more Indian blood. And tribes today are still wrestling with that legacy that is encoded in their constitutions. And so how to either keep it and eventually run out, or change their constitutions, or go to lineal descent, or there's a lot of different options that tribes have taken, and there's no one size fits all, and there's no silver bullet to working through this issue. So that's those are some of the main takeaways of the book. And we wanted to show that there's no one size fits all, because so many tribes have different histories, different relationships with different colonial powers. And depending on the state you're in, I mean, there are all these different factors at play. So the book was designed as an anthology with different writers from different nations to show that there are different approaches to take. And each community has to figure that out for themselves. So those are the big ones. Yeah. Go ahead.
I wanted to highlight 3 points in the book. The first chapter is about Indian girls and dating. And that's, and we thought, well, one of our solutions, we could just ask Indian women to freeze their eggs. But that's an expensive model, and I don't think we can be a petri dish kind of organizations. On page 80, Senator Higgins from Delaware in 1895, he says, one way of getting rid of the Indian problem is through intermarriage. They knew in 1895, this would be our road to termination, and we may do that with our own hand. But anyway, the next 3 pages from 81 and 82, it's about my grandmother, who was a Mohawk, adopted, and she became a medical doctor in 1899. So it's sort of kind of a personal story. And the chapter that Joe Calt and Steve Cornell wrote at the end of the book, and they assert that are we members of a club that have benefits, or are we citizens of a nation that has responsibility? And I think the conversation is about responsibility, not benefits. And what does that responsibility entail for each tribe? And so I think those are 3. I mean, the other chapters are good. And we had, for Indian people, we're trying to find our place in this world and within our own tribes. but also what we're trying to do individually and collectively is find our voice. We don't need to see somebody else to tell us what our voice is. And so each individual tribe has to decide that, and the leadership needs to do that. But every community person is a stakeholder in this this conversation.
Mhm. Yep.
Thank you for those summaries. Maybe I'll just kind of repeat back because it's helpful. And what I hear you saying, yeah, Kathleen, is that this tool was really a tool that was used by other people, the federal government, the US government, as a tool to encourage the extinguishment of their federal trust responsibility and to Native people over generations. And the cartoon that is on the back, I think, is helpful because it shows how, and I think I read this in here as well, that if through intermarriage within 3 generations, people can be displaced from their own communities in using blood quantum. It can, within 3 generations, which is so short, right? It doesn't even have to be 200 years or 150 years. It can, happen, within 20 or 30 years, which I think is really astonishing.
Let me just say, I had a woman one time, we were considering scholarships, and she was upset that her son didn't get one. And she said, I want you to know that my son is 13th 256 degree Cherokee. And I waited and I said, well, ma'am, if he cuts himself shaving, how much blood is left? Well, I held the phone way out here, and I could hear her screaming at me from Oklahoma. But her son was a member of the Cherokee Nation, and we had to consider his application. But what he knew about Cherokees, you could fit into a thimble. And so that's the dilemma that we face.
Right.
Yep.
How do we, as communities, think about this balance of, having people who are invested in, in the community. And I know for us in Alaska, that often is centered around our role to protect the land. If there's something that's critical, for our communities, it is that we entrust ourselves and our future generations to be the caretakers of the land, where our ancestors were, our grandparents, were, and what that looks like, and making sure that we have people who are ready to take on those responsibilities.
Mhm.
Is that something that you heard from other communities or other writers as they contributed to this work, as like this idea around land?
I'm waiting for Kathleen.
Well, Becky Webster, Dr. Rebecca Webster, who is Oneida, and she's also a lawyer, and she wrote about tribal jurisdiction, and she did talk a little bit about that. Her focus since then has shifted into food sovereignty and Three Sisters agriculture, and this the resurgence of identity, tribal identity is connected to land and cultural practices. So she was one author who does talk about land base. As far as like the Maori authors in the book do talk more about the stewardship, protecting the land model. Becky stays more in the legal sort of sphere. But the Maori authors they wrote their article as a conversation between the two of them, and they do discuss this this relationship with human beings and the land, and human beings as being part of this ecosystem and not masters of it. Like this Western model we have of the dominion over the earth, and natural resources are there for us to do with what we will. So they bring a Maori perspective to this, this model of living in balance and protecting the land. As part of as a way to think about what it means to be Maori that gets out of that blood quantum box. And that's been one of the big takeaways from the book, is encouraging these conversations. If a nation is not going to think about themselves as defined by blood quantum, there's got to be something to replace that. And so what would that be? And so that connection to the ceremonies that come out of that, like Oneida people talked about strawberry ceremonies. And this time of year is when the strawberries are coming out, and going and picking them and doing beadwork with strawberry designs as an important part of their identity. So that's an example of that land piece getting us outside the box, outside the blood quantum box.
So
Go ahead, Norbert.
I think one of the key issues here is that we need to go back to our own traditional values. And what are those values, and what makes us a people in terms of our identity and how we belong? You know, we talk about giving back, and how do we do that? I would hate to see that we give out so many scholarships that we just brain drain our communities. So there has to be some incentives to have people want to come back and build a community, because if we don't have a community, we don't have a nation. So it's how do we capture the concept of return on investment of our people, and that should be a value that we should have. There's a book called Ishi of Two Worlds, and Ishi was in Northern California, and he was the last member of his tribe. It was about 1911, and some anthropologists found him wandering around in the desert. He spoke his language, but he had nobody to speak it to. So they put him in the basement of a museum, and he lived the next 20 years as kind of a lonely guy. And what my greatest fear is that we're going to run into our own issue if we're not careful. And who will be the last one? You know, I don't think that will happen, but I think we need to keep that concept in mind, is that we could eventually disappear. Then who gets the land? You know, there's some non-Indian people, especially in Congress, would love to have our land and resources. You know, I think we have to protect our homeland, and that's through our own citizens and membership.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, you brought up an interesting point around in the absence of blood quantum, what, right? Yeah, if that isn't, you know, how we're going to define either citizenship of a tribal nation, which, you know, for the Oneida, I think that's a good question. For us in Alaska, and I know you both are aware of this, of our different systems in which we have organized as Native corporations, village corporations, and also having, you know, our tribes and tribal entities. It becomes, you know, maybe even more complicated to think about shareholder status and shareholder descendant status and tribal status and tribal descendant status as well. I think what you're asking us is really important to consider, which is not only, you know, what does it mean to be a tribal member and carry that legacy and responsibility, and then can I transfer that in some way to what it means to be a Native corporation shareholder, and that responsibility, you know, for us, for our communities kind of moving forward. Like, you know, and I don't, it's not a model that has been tested out by others. And so I think we're kind of, you know, making it up as we go along. And this idea of transference between the generations has also not occurred before. So we really are.
Well, the complexity of blood quantum is mind-boggling. It's not a simple question. It's not a quick question of Oneida's going from one quarter to 1/8, because in 20 years we're going to talk about 1/16. So what we do is kick the can down the road. So one thing I would suggest that your nation might consider is finding a demographer. Now, we all have statistics. We know how many boys and girls we have. We know how old they are. That we could have statistics coming out of our ears, and we had them too. But a demographer is will give you the calculus of population of what will happen in the long term. I don't know if you have an in-migration or an out-migration. We can't brain drain our community. So you need a demographer to help you do that analysis and fit your corporate model into that analysis to figure out, what does this look like for us? You know, we can't see around the corner, but what does this look like for us moving forward? And I think that might be one of your best bets. It took us a while to get a demographer to work with us, and we're getting deeper into this. And sometimes we just don't know the question yet.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. And we did have Dr. Rosita with us a couple of weeks ago, and she did have some of that demographic information for Alaska, or they had approximated some of it too. And it was fascinating because you could see the dilution is already in progress.
So one of the things I talked with Rosita, because I did a workshop with her about blood quantum a few years ago. And one of the questions that really confounded everybody was local control. If we keep fanning out to people in the lower 48 or wherever you want to call it, and you have more citizens outside and they have voting rights, they control the homeland. And so how do you figure out, how do you control local control over your own destiny? And so when you give out citizenship, you just can't pass them out. You got to figure out, what does that all mean? And what are the political and legal ramifications of that?
Yeah. That's helpful.
Yep. There is a really, for me, one of the most impactful chapters of the book. It's called From Tribal Members to Native Nation Citizens. And it is by Stephen Cornell and Joseph Kalt.
Yes.
And there is a really nice quote in there from Sir Tipene O'Regan, and he is a Maori leader. And he challenges these notions of the relationship between the individual person and the community. And that this very individualized Western notion that has been forced onto so many tribes, and the revitalization of bringing back a sort of communal collective identity. And he says, until we come to terms with the question of what we want to be as a people, there is no need for any strategic direction beyond making cash and distributing it more or less efficiently and more or less equitably. If that's all the membership of an indigenous culture amounts to, then why bother? So in the US context, a parallel argument could be, if all that being a citizen of a nation amounts to is getting a per cap or healthcare or housing from the tribal government, then why bother being a nation, much less a community? So it gets at that. Oren Lyons talked about that as well. And in this chapter, there is a conversation about shifting thinking out of this individual, what can I get kind of way of thinking, to handing on to the next generation legacies of land care, like you mentioned, Alicia, and ceremonies and language and songs and stories, and making sure that, it's not just a share or a per cap that's passed on, but it's these other, these intangible things that are thinking about passing those on to the next generations. These intimate relationships with the earth and with each other. And that's the responsibility part of it coming in. And it's tough to shift thinking that way. And it takes work and effort it's a paradigm shift, and it takes a lot of work and effort and conversations like this to shift that, because it's, that colonialism is ongoing. It's still ongoing, and it still shapes how we all think about what it means to be a community. So
So
go ahead, Norbert. I'm going to get my kids off the bus, and I'm going to be right back.
Okay.
10 minutes.
50 years ago,
I'll be right back.
50 years ago, we should have had this conversation, and we did. And there's 4 things that the tribes need to consider. One, you need to think about sovereignty. What does that sovereignty mean in terms your own nation, collectively and individually? Second, you need to think about your institution, Head Start, education, healthcare, housing, and how those institutions function under the umbrella of sovereignty and finding your voice. The third thing is culture, that we can't abandon the culture that brought us here. And we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. We didn't get here by ourselves, and they put some thoughtful ideas together in terms of how do we survive together as a community. And the fourth thing is leadership, and how we elect our leaders, who we elect our leaders, but also that's the formal leadership. There's the informal leadership, which you perform. You're not elected, but you're trying to have a voice to influence the leaders who are elected. Everybody on this call is an informal leader. And so we have to see our people as leaders and how we survive together. So I think largely what we're trying to do is provide the insight so that we can make an informed decision as we move forward. And the other thing I was going to talk about is civics. There's Indian civics and there's American civics. And sometimes we confuse those lines, but I learned at the kitchen table what it means to belong to my clan, how our tribe makes decisions, what are our mottos, what is it that it makes me as a citizen of my nation. I learned about the treaties. I learned about the two-row wampum belt. I learned about how we elect leaders and how we depose leaders. So that's the Indian civics. But I also learned about the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem and how to fold a flag and all that other kind of stuff that white people don't need to do that. They just have to learn one form of government. But our form of government, I know how we make decisions, and I know how US Congress doesn't make decisions. And what happens, but we're a victim of all of that. But I think understanding our own civics, maybe that's a topic that you need to think about in a future broadcast. But what is it that's unique about us that makes us? What did you learn at the kitchen table about your belonging and identity? And I think we need to revive that and be able to understand the differentiation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because often that those native civics lessons do happen at home, and they, are maybe informal in nature, and also, but there's also potential there for us to, if you're, to help with that conversation of providing that information of like, here's how the system works, because it's not intuitive. No one is born really knowing how, shares and corporations, how how that
Yeah.
all that works. It has to be taught and explained to you.
Let me tell you where we're stuck. And I
Mm.
call it the grandma's dilemma.
Okay.
And grandmas are pretty smart ladies. They're very smart, but they know in their head that blood quantum is not sustainable over time. They know that. You know, you don't need to be a math major, but grandmas know it's not sustainable. But in their heart, they know that they want their children and grandchildren and grandchildren to be citizens of the nation and all that entails. And so it's a conundrum of having two opposing ideas at the same time. And as a result, we do nothing. And we're about to have a conversation. We're hoping it's a civil conversation, because really the battle is between benefits and blood. And you know, people have gotten used to having certain benefits as part of the membership, but they don't know how those benefits started. And so we need to figure out, we need to leave benefits at the door, and try to figure our own identities over time. I mean, you could be 1/8 of 8 different tribes and not have a tribe to belong to. You could probably belong to 8 different corporations, you know, and where do you fit? You know, where is your place in this world? And so we got a lot to think about.
Yeah, I recognize that sense of stuckness around, because it is divisive. And I have to say, when I read the book, the chapters that were the most difficult for me to read were the instances in which, like, the tribe or the community, it was implementing rules to keep out people who they felt like were too white or not native enough.
Yeah.
You know, and there was a really searing one that was in here. I can't remember what chapter it was, but it was a stepdaughter or a stepdaughter who had been raised in the community, and then at a certain point she became a certain age, and then she was no longer able to access, like, the ceremonies and the, you know, the things that she had been, you know, so accustomed to. And I'm just curious about that, and, you know, what your thinking has been around that. I know it's up to each community and nation to decide who its memberships are, but that's hard.
Not too long ago, we had a similar conversation on the phone online nationwide, and a man from out east said, "I've got 3 sons that I'm ready to petition the tribe to enroll them." And his next statement was, "What are they going to get out of it?" And my comment was saying, you know, we really don't need you. If you're only thinking about what they're going to get out of it, what they're going to accrue from it. And I'm sure they couldn't find Oneida on the map if you tried, you know. So we have conversations that we don't have conversations about. We have difficult conversations, and we got to figure out a way to have those conversations in a civil way. And, you know, there's a tribe in Minnesota, they get their per capita is $17,000 a month, you know. And so when the teacher says, "Johnny, where's your homework?" And he says, "Look, when I'm 18, I can buy and sell you and this school," you know. So, but he's not even learned how to protect his own money, but that becomes the value rather than belonging to a nation that has gone on for centuries before him. You know, he's just lucky by birth.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying around how do we separate this conversation around the benefits that we might receive to this cultural identity, or, you know, this sense of belonging.
Yeah, the benefits are a blessing, not an entitlement. And we're thinking about entitlement, you know, that's the whole thing. And I'd rather figure out how to survive the next 200 years rather than the next check. And in my darkest days, I think, for my own tribe, I think we may be already dead. We just don't know it yet, you know. And I don't want to think that. I mean, I got to give up every morning with some hope. that we're going to be able to get through this. And I think we got a critical mass in our own group to know that we may not have an answer, but this is complicated. And we just can't make a knee-jerk reaction that would create bigger problems down the road. So we just need to have that full-throated, full-hearted conversation about what does this mean? Because we're going to let not only our ancestors down, we're going to let down our own people, our own youngsters. You know, that they say, look, you guys left us a mess. Why didn't you do anything? You know, and yeah, you know, so we can't kick it down another generation. You know, because you know, and language is important. You know, that's part of the culture. You know, I don't know how many speakers you have left. But you know, indigenous languages around the world are in danger. You know?
Absolutely. It is actually an area of focus, a new emerging area of focus for our foundation is around indigenous languages. And one of our efforts is to, you know, start reaching out to communities to do more of language census work. So we have a better sense of how many speakers we have.
You know, we talked about a lot of our people went to Haskell in Kansas. And so we have a lot of Haskell babies. We call them Haskell rascals. But you have Mount Edgecombe babies, you know, you know, and you know, you marry who you fall in love with or you have babies with, you know, but they didn't stay in the village and marry the girl next door. They went out, and somebody says the biggest downfall of Indian nations when young boys turned 16, they got a driver's license, and they went out to California, and they went out to Texas, and they went out to Chicago, and they, you know, and there we diluted the blood, you know. But so we need to be thoughtful and mindful of how we move forward. That's all, you know.
I was curious, you know, you talked about like having hope. That your book has really opened, I think, probably a lot of doors for you to have these conversations nationally. Are there communities where you feel like there's good conversations happening or kind of interesting, you know, takes on this issue? Who are those people?
Well, you know, there's a small tribe in northern Minnesota, Red Lake. They made everybody a full blood. So everybody was on the rolls is now a full blood. And so now they got 2.5 generations to figure this out. They didn't solve the problem. They just put a Band-Aid on. Some tribes like the Onondagas and Oran Lions group, they went back to the old traditional matrilineal model. Some people are going to go from 1/4 to 1/8. Some tribes are doing nothing, and doing nothing is a decision because eventually it's going to get you, you know. And so so the Potawatomis have, everybody's got a different different solution, but it's a solution that works for them at this point, you know. And the Potawatomis have people all over the country, and they've designed a voting system to those people in terms of how many people live in that part of the country. And so that works for them, you know. Most people are fumbling right now, I think. You know, we can't get tribal leadership to talk about this. And I don't know what you know, we've been trying like crazy to get a tribal chairman and a tribal person to talk about it, but they won't talk about it publicly. You know, it's the rest of us who are bringing the issue forward, you know. And so we're kind of forcing their hand to think about it. They're worried about the political future rather than the future of the tribe. I think, I don't know. It's been really a problem. So
I was just going to ask you, like, why do you think that's the case? I mean, I think I might have a sense, but why do you? Yeah, why don't we want to talk about this as an issue?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I think they're afraid for their own jobs. I think they're afraid politically, you know, that they want to agree with the last person in the room. So they're stuck, but they can't admit it. I don't know why they don't, but it's just trying to get a tribal chairman to write an essay about this dilemma. And maybe Kathleen has an insight why tribal leadership don't step forward.
Okay,
Yeah,
there.
And there you go.
Okay. I mean, I think it's not unlike any other political lightning rods. I think a lot of tribal leaders just don't want to touch it and want to see which way the wind is blowing first before weighing in. So what I've seen happening is tribal leaders being and there's usually one or two individuals that will come forward and be supportive, but the majority of leadership will remain neutral and just see where things are going, because that's the political game. So it seems like the changes that are happening are coming from grassroots educational organizations that are separate from tribal leadership, and getting that groundswell of community support to then take it to General Tribal Council or whatever the main forum is, and then leadership weighs in. So there has to be that. Yeah, it seems like that's the pattern, that community push first, because it's not going to come from tribal leadership.
So I think our salvation is young people, because they're the majority of the stakeholders of their own future destiny. And so I think Gabe Galanda, who was an attorney in Oregon, I think, and he writes a nice essay about kinship. We might be heading towards a kinship model, but we have to know what that means legally and politically, but we need to help our young people find their voice in terms of how to move it forward. Because I've given up on the formal leadership to be able to do something. And then moving forward, that I never thought I'd do this in a million years, is that we would write a second book.
Yeah.
And I must say, I might want to have my head examined, but
yeah.
We got Kathleen thought that anyway, but she's part of the enterprise. And my daughter and another woman is helping us. But what we're getting is young writers to start to write. And what we're getting is we're not writing the same book, we're writing a book with more depth. And it should be out at the end of the year, probably the first quarter of next year. When you write an anthology, what you end up doing is, and Kathleen knows this well, you chase writers. You give them June 1 deadline, they start writing in May, and you don't hear from them till August, So you really got to push them to do that. But we got some powerful writers coming in the second book. The first book, we were throwing darts at the wall and saying, what are the issues? But right now, we've got some people who really have a voice. And I think, I don't know if it'll make any decisions, but in fact, again, we hope it'll be a reader in the grassroots in our communities, not for academic institutions, but I do hope graduate students and kids in college will start writing papers about identity instead of about some inane history moment for Benjamin Franklin, but they write something about their own people in terms of how they move forward. So that is starting to happen. It's not happening as fast as I would like it. That's all.
Yeah, there's a clan model that's been discussed at Oneida and other Haudenosaunee or Iroquois tribes, like Seneca and Onondaga and Tuscarora, and going back to the clan model. One of the challenges is that there are people who don't know their clan, and so they don't know where their place is, and having to get creative and be adaptive and not trying to recreate a clan model of 200, 300 years ago, but to build something new that's rooted in that kinship, that kinship model. So there was where was it, Norbert? There was a youth it was a youth mock GTC meeting where
Oh,
they
yeah.
followed that clan model. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember that.
As young people testing out what would this actually look like, which was a beautiful form of resurgence and reclaiming these government systems that work, these tribal government systems that have sustained and guided communities for millennia. And there is a lot of inherent wisdom and checks and balances, and leadership, indigenous leadership models in these, in the clan model, in these governance models, and bringing these back. And a lot has been erased or forgotten, or there's apathy around doing it that way, but there are getting young people to learn their civics, learn their tribal civics. Did we talk about that yet, Norbert?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
It gave me lots of food for thought around tribal civics and corporation, what it means to be a owner of this company.
So this is really, this is not a problem. It's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. If we see it as a problem, we're gonna suffer. But we got to see it as an opportunity, how we move forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the news on this next volume of the book. We'll definitely be on the. Well, before we came on, I learned that there was a disagreement between our co-editors on the cover art. So I'm real curious as to who will win the next round of cover art conversations. I think one of the things that was really powerful that I really liked was the use of art in this book, actually, of having poetry, having plays, just different ways, and stories as really powerful modes of communication. And for this conversation in particular, it felt very appropriate because there is deep emotion in this topic. And even as we were talking about, like, why don't political leaders or elected leaders want to have this conversation? I'm like, oh, because it's emotional, right? And often they're in a space of governing, and just making, voting on laws or rules or investments or whatever it is that they're, they're charged with doing. And this is much more about who we are as people, and being in touch with that, part of ourselves, and I think we see that in the book, right? That it is kind of deeply personal, I would say, and impactful, and that there's really hard conversations that are part of this. Maybe one thing I'll just reflect on, because I think it's unique to Native women, but it came up a lot in this book, which was kind of this choice of who we marry, and who your children are going to be, and like this calculus that we have put, like the burden of that, I think that we've put on young women in particular. And so, Norbert, as you were talking about, like, having so much faith in our future, I agree. And yet also I recognize that we're continuing to act, like, if we don't change the system, the burden of so many of these decisions continues to be with these young women who are making decisions about who they marry, who their children are going to be, and if they're going to be considered members of their own communities.
Well, I don't think the burden should solely fall on women, and that's unfair.
It is, but it does feel like this sometimes. What you read about it.
Well, I think, young men run around like they're Johnny Appleseed, and they just spreading the seed around, and they take very little responsibility, and so I think we have to do something to help young men decide what their responsibilities are if they're going to have children and how to move forward, So we have too many single parents out there, largely women, But
Yeah.
as something you said before, I think it's the arts, humanities, the social scientists. It's just not the political scientists in law school that are going to make these decisions. I think as a holistic
Norbert.
opportunity that we take all the disciplines, and that's the way Indians think, and I think that's important to think about this in that way. So get those young men in line,
That would be a good chapter for the next book. To
Yeah.
have young, like just having these young voices, have young Native men weigh in, because we don't really hear their voices in the current book.
Yeah.
We just got a kid from Northwestern who can write an article, so, but we have some young people in high school and college writing with their parents. And so we're starting to hand the torch off them. We want to get more depth in terms of them finding their voices. We can't find the voice for them. They have to find their own. And so I'm just thrilled by that.
Awesome. Let me see. Well, we have, I think, a few people online. I'd be curious if folks had ideas or questions for Kathleen or Norbert. Yeah, I think there's, this idea that young people are yearning to be part of their tribes, like they're really thirsty to be part of the community, to be welcomed, to share their gifts and learn about their cultures. And so how do we create that space of welcoming, to young people? I think is a nice question.
So I think one of the things that gives me hope is that as I witness powwows around the state and around the country that I've seen, and the question was, how long are you guys going to last? I mean, how long are Indians going to last in this country? And so when you see drums at a powwow, you see a lot of younger, and the answer is like, until the last song is sung. And if you look around the drums, you see a lot of young people singing. And so I think that gives me hope when I see that, and I think an organization like yours, a foundation, can create some workshops or some conversations with young men, and have them start talking about and thinking, so it's a maturation problem, I think, but we just can't go on having babies and have women taking care of them. That's just not work. It's not right.
And Alicia, thank you for noticing not everyone picks up or notices that the thread of artwork that runs through the book, because I think because it's such an emotional issue, art and story helps bridge that. And I wanted to plug one of the artists in the book, Kristen Dorsey. She's a Chickasaw jeweler. These are her blood quantum earrings that I'm rocking for her today, and she's got the drop of blood with the barcode on it, and people could put their fraction on there, and it's a way to kind of subvert and address these emotional issues, and rather than head on, which can just be too intimidating sometimes. So yeah, there's some really good, cool artists in there.
Yeah, I hope the next round includes that, because I think it was a really powerful way to consider this issue.
So two of the writers that we're thinking about is the next thing. I had dinner with Joy Harjo, who is the poet laureate, about submitting a poem about identity and belonging. So she's thinking about that. And then we also had Buffy St. Marie, who won an Academy Award. And so just last week, she said she was going to do an article. And we got Susan Harjo, who won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Phil Delory, whose father Vine, who's written 20 books, he's going to write. He's a professor at Harvard. And so we got really strong writers that I think will turn ahead once, they're thoughtful people.
Awesome. Yeah, that'll be really exciting.
I'll send you an autographed copy.
Oh, perfect. Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I don't see any other questions from our group, so I might, but if anyone did have one, let us know and you could put that in the chat. But otherwise, I will say thank you, Koyana, for joining us this afternoon. This has been a really rich conversation, and I hope the first, I think as we kind of move forward as a community, having connections with people in other tribal nations and like entities that are going through this is very, very helpful. And I hope we can keep in touch.
Yeah. Well, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call Kathleen.
Yeah, don't hesitate to call Norbert. Yeah, thank you for thank you for for having us. And yeah, our debate continues with the cover of this book.
Yes.
6 years later, and it'll continue for the next one. But if there are questions or comments that come up after this, please send them our way. And I'm sending and wishing you strength and resilience and endurance to continue these conversations in your community. So it's tough but important. Yeah.
Well, we know that we don't have the answer, but we know what the questions are, but maybe the questions will get us to the end line at some point in time.
Yeah, thank you. Very well said. All right, well, we'll send you off into your evening and the rest of these folks out for the rest of their afternoon. And thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll sign off.
Yeah. I'm going golfing on my ancestors' land.
Thank you.
Good. Enjoy. Bye.
Thank you, Alicia. Bye.